Hey guys, tonight we slip inside Egypt's ancient pyramids, your flashlight beam trembling against walls older than civilization itself, as sand drifts in around your ankles, whispering secrets. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry, the scorpions are on coffee break, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments and I'll know if you're already nodding off or wide awake. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, feeling the weight of millennia pressing through the air. Immediately, you're struck by the stillness. No bird song, no breeze, just the soft scrape of your boots and your own heartbeat hammering in your chest. In this place, nestled among the shifting sands of Giza, each stone block of the Great Pyramid weighs more than a hippopotamus, yet aligns with such precision it could slice the horizon at perfect right angles. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians used wooden sledges lubricated with water to haul those massive blocks, or some even stranger contraption lost to time. A mainstream fact: the Great Pyramid was built around 2560 BCE for Pharaoh Khufu, standing originally at 481 feet tall, making it the tallest man-made structure for nearly 4,000 years. A quirky tidbit: some fringe enthusiasts claim secret chambers were scented with lotus oil to lull intruders into a narcotic haze, though there's no pollen residue to prove they weren't just high on imagination. You press on into the first chamber, the air growing cooler, an oasis of chill beneath the scorching desert sun. Your skin prickles as you pass hieroglyphics etched into limestone, offering prayers to Osiris, god of the afterlife, and instructing the pharaoh's soul on its journey. You probably won't survive deciphering all those spells, but hey, at least you have Google. The passage narrows, forcing you to tilt your head so your helmet light catches a hidden niche in the wall. It seems too small for a mummy, too large for a standard funerary vessel. Scholars still debate whether these niches held sacred relics or were simply construction alcoves misinterpreted by modern eyes. You shine your light inside and imagine a tiny golden statuette of Anubis, only to realize you left it in your other jacket. Joke's on you. Every step echoes. You hear your own whispered, "hello," bounce back in a dozen ghostly echoes. It's strangely comforting until you remember, echo is just sound, not a friendly guide. A breeze of uncertainty brushes your neck. Did that come from behind or ahead? Probably just a gap between stones, unless the curse of the pyramid decided to surprise you early. Despite the shadows, you notice careful tool marks, evidence of copper chisels and stone hammers. Mainstream archaeologists agree these tools, combined with ingenious lever systems, enabled workers to erect these colossal structures. Yet fringe writers argue, aliens handed down blueprints, though their star charts would definitely need updating. Historians still argue whether laborers were paid with beer rations, or simply driven by devotion to the sun god Ra. As you enter a small vestibule, the ceiling tilts sharply. You duck and glance upward. The corbelled roofing technique here distributes weight away from the chamber, preventing collapse. Ingenious, right? It's structural mastery that predates modern engineering by millennia. A fringe rumor insists a secondary hidden spiral ramp facilitated construction, but no trace has been found. Maybe because ramp fans haven't looked in your attic yet. Light from your headlamp catches a cluster of faint, graffiti-like inscriptions. These were left by workmen, ordinary Egyptians, scribbling their names, dates, and even complaints. "Zozo's kid stole my lunch, and wish I'd stayed home for papyrus painting." Their humor endures, tickling you across 4,000 years. Historians still argue whether these scribbles were pure boredom or part of a ritual marking the end of their labor shift. A tiny gust of wind stirs the dust at your feet. You realize you're breathing ancient air, possibly as old as the Old Kingdom itself. You shiver though the chamber is warm, because it's not just temperature, it's the gravity of history settling over your shoulders. You pause at the entrance to the next gallery, your mind buzzing with visions of pharaohs lounging on golden thrones, only to recall that no one's found a shred of royal furniture here. Yet, historians still argue whether the throne was looted long ago or never installed. You joke aloud. Maybe they built it in IKEA and it collapsed on the way in. Then wince, it's echoing again. And so, deeper you go, each step brushing past the ghosts of workers, priests, and perhaps even the pharaoh himself, whose heartless stone mask gazes down blankly. You inhale, taste grit and wonder, and you realize you're part of something vast, stretching beyond your own sleepy thoughts. You edge forward into a narrowing corridor, the walls closing in like the jaws of some ancient beast slowly awakening. The air grows cooler still, and your breath puffs out in tiny clouds that vanish against the limestone. There's a faint scent of dust and something indefinably metallic, like the aftertaste of rusted bronze hidden for centuries. As you step carefully over uneven stone, you can't help but imagine the thousands of hands that carved this passage, chipping away in rhythmic unison to create this tunnel of mystery. Mainstream historians date these passageways to around 200 and 500 BCE, constructed during Khufu's reign as part of the Great Pyramid's intricate internal design. They likely served ritual or functional purposes, but historians still argue whether they guided priests on secret ceremonial paths, or simply diverted seismic stress away from the main chambers. You lean your shoulder into the wall, feeling the subtle vibration of sand shifting behind you, proof that this monument still moves, ever so slightly under its own colossal weight. Your light catches a series of barely perceptible grooves carved diagonally across the ceiling blocks. Fringe theorists claim these were sound channels, engineered to amplify the resonance of chanting priests, turning the pyramid into a hypersonic hymn hall. Though no acoustic anomalies have been conclusively recorded, you tilt your head and tap your palm against the wall. It thumps back in a hollow note that's more spooky basement than soundstage. Still, you can't help but hum a few bars of your favorite lullaby, feeling the echo swirl around you. The tunnel slopes downward, and you descend a shallow ramp, grit crunching underfoot. The stones here are smoother, worn by centuries of visitors and perhaps centuries more of sand-blasting winds. You remember that earlier vestibule's corbelled roof, ingenious weight redistribution, and now you see how the corridor's slight pitch might relieve downward pressure on the inner chambers. Engineers still debate whether this gradient was intentional or an incidental byproduct of construction logistics. A shaft of pale light suddenly splits the darkness ahead. You emerge into a small antechamber, its walls decorated with faint red ochre brushstrokes, sacred markers, or mere trial sketches for more elaborate tomb art later abandoned. Fringe archaeologists whisper that these sketches formed a coded map to hidden rooms, only readable under a full moon's alignment with Orion's belt. You glance back to the dusty ceiling, half expecting constellations to sparkle among the stones. They don't, unless your eyelids are playing tricks on you after so much darkness. Your flashlight flickers as you approach a cluster of tool marks nearly identical to ones you saw before, evidence of the copper chisels and dolerite pounders used by thousands of skilled laborers. Mainstream experts agree the builders worked in rotating crews, each group honored with meals and beer rations, a fact that humanizes these colossal projects. You almost chuckle picturing grimy workers toasting with barley brew after a long shift, until you recall that ancient Egyptian beer was basically a soupy bread mash. Cheers indeed. Pressing onward, the corridor turns sharply to the left. You squeeze through the angle, shoulder brushing against limestone, and you hear the ghost of your voice echo back in a distorted timbre. You make a sarcastic comment. Yeah, great acoustics for a pharaoh's private concert, and your own echo seems to snicker in response. There's no audience here but you, and maybe a handful of bats roosting in hidden niches. They're dropping smudged like ink blots along the walls. You definitely won't survive their guano without a gas mask. But thankfully nobody mentioned that in the YouTube comments. The passage opens into a long, low-sloping tunnel, known as the descending corridor, leading you further into the pyramid's belly. This tunnel is more austere than the antechamber, devoid of decoration but lined with enormous granite blocks. Scholars still argue whether granite was chosen for spiritual reasons, to separate the mundane limestone world from more sacred spaces, or simply for its unmatched strength. You run your fingers over the smooth pinkish surface, noting tiny indentations where ropes might have been lashed to haul these stones into place. The idea of dragging multi-ton slabs on wooden rollers makes you wince. Your back already aches from crouching. A sudden draft tickles your neck, and you wonder if it's the breath of the pyramid itself, exhaling after millennia. Fringe enthusiasts claim these winds are messages from the gods guiding worthy souls toward enlightenment. You shrug and push forward, telling yourself it's just basic fluid dynamics. Cool air pulled through vents, meeting warm interior air, creating a subtle breeze. Still, the notion feels vaguely comforting, like a whisper telling you that you'll make it out alive. Probably. Halfway down the sloping tunnel, you spot a crack in the wall, barely wide enough to slip through. A shiver of excitement races down your spine. Could this lead to an undiscovered side chamber? You squeeze your body sideways, feet scuffing against the polished floor, and peer into a thin void. It's pitch black, but you can see the faint outline of stacked rubble, and a shaft angling upward. Many explorers have attempted to widen these fissures, only to meet dead ends or cages of rock. Historians still argue whether abandoned attempts like this reflect construction errors or intentional traps to thwart tomb robbers. You withdraw, dust motes dancing in your beam like tiny galaxies. You shake your head and crack a grin. Well, no hidden treasure today, rat race, you murmur. At least not yet. You continue down the corridor, feeling the walls inch closer as the passage becomes narrower and the angle steeper. The echoes grow softer here, as though the pyramid is swallowing your voice whole. You pause to catch your breath, listening to the drip of condensation falling somewhere far ahead. It sounds like a single raindrop in an empty cathedral. The corridor ends at a low doorway sealed with granite slabs. This is the famous plug chamber, meant to block intruders from the Queen's chamber above. It was only removed in 1837 by explorer Nathaniel Davison, though locals might have known about it for centuries. A mainstream fact, those granite plugs weigh over 20 tons each, and required ingenious livering techniques to slide into place. A quirky rumor insists Davison was guided by a dream, in which Khufu himself whispered instructions, but that's the kind of bedtime story you only hear after midnight. You push the granite aside. Well, you pretend you do, because actually, moving 20 tons single-handedly is a joke. Instead, you imagine the armada of workers and levers, the chain of command, shouting instructions over the clamour of chisels. Historians still argue whether such tasks were accomplished by paid labourers or conscripted peasants during the flooding season. Either way, this plug gate marks a threshold between the known and the hidden, much like the veil between wakefulness and dreams. Stepping through, you feel a shift in ambience, slightly warmer, slightly more oppressive, as if the pyramid itself is warning you not to go further. You swallow hard, tasting grit and anticipation, and you remind yourself, no fresh intros here, just one continuous journey deeper into the earth and the past. You step through the low granite doorway and emerge into the king's chamber, its vast rectangular space illuminated only by the glow of your headlamp dancing across massive stone walls. The air here carries a faint chill, as though the stones themselves remember the cool Nile breezes that once swept across the plateau. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the cavernous room. 9 enormous granite beams spanning the ceiling, each weighing many tons, arranged like colossal ribs holding back the weight of the pyramid above. It feels less like a tomb, and more like some primeval concert hall built to channel the hum of the universe. A mainstream fact: the King's Chamber houses a solid red granite sarcophagus, quarried hundreds of miles away at Aswan, perfectly fitted into a hollowed niche in the floor, so precisely that not a grain of sand could slip through its seams. Historians still argue whether the sarcophagus was ever used to entomb Pharaoh Khufu himself, or left empty as a symbolic vessel for his spiritual journey. You walk around the sarcophagus's edge, fingertips grazing its smooth surface, ice cold under your gloves. Fringe aficionados whisper that the chamber's geometry focuses cosmic energy, turning the sarcophagus into a power generator, capable of healing ailments or even levitating objects placed within. You smirk at the thought. Your flashlight isn't going to float anytime soon, but there's an undeniable stillness in the room that almost makes you believe a single hum might resonate here, if only you knew the right frequency to chant. Above you, the 9 relieving chambers form a layered ceiling, a structural solution to divert weight away from the sarcophagus room. Ingenious engineers carved each granite slab at slight angles, so pressure trickles off like water over a rock. Scholars still argue whether these chambers were built sequentially or simultaneously, a question that matters if you're trying to reconstruct the original construction timeline. You press your ear against one slab and hear a dull thud, more reassuring than spooky, until you realize you're basically headbanging an ancient stone sarcophagus. Despite the silence, you sense a gentle vibration underfoot. Some fringe theories claim natural piezoelectric effects in the quartz-rich granite generate faint electrical currents. You half expect a tingling in your fingertips, but all you feel is the slap of your own pulse. You joke aloud. "Sorry, geezer, my phone's already on airplane mode," and your voice bounces around the chamber, each echo a playful nudge, reminding you how small you really are. The chamber's north wall bears a single cartouche of Khufu's name, etched with painstaking precision. A mainstream fact: no other paintings or inscriptions adorn this room, a stark contrast to richly decorated New Kingdom tombs. Centuries later, historians still argue whether the blank walls were intentional, to keep the focus on the pharaoh's cosmic journey, or simply a cost-saving measure by Middle Kingdom craftsmen. You cup your hand over the cartouche, picturing artisans mixing red ochre pigments, their brushes trembling as they traced each hieroglyph. Your headlamp skims over an odd feature, a low bulge in the eastern wall, just above chest height. Fringe writers claim this protrusion once held a crystal orb that aligned with the constellation Sirius on the pharaoh's birthday. No evidence of mounting hardware remains, suggesting either a clever camouflage or a story spun from bedtime folk tales. You tap the bulge, it's solid granite. You picture a cargo drop with a cosmic docking system, probably easier to imagine than hauling 5-ton stones up ramps. A faint draft seeps from a tiny gap beneath the western wall. Scholars still argue whether this feature was a functional airshaft, a construction tunnel backfilled after completion, or simply an unfortunate gap between blocks. You crouch and trace the outline of a narrow channel leading away. It's barely wide enough for a child's arm, let alone your bulky elbow. You wiggle closer and peer inside. Utter darkness. You resist the urge to send in your GoPro. This isn't a low-budget horror show, after all. The geometry of the chamber aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal points, north-south and east-west, laid out like a precise sundial frozen in stone. A fringe rumor holds that the chamber channels celestial harmonies, implying ancient Egyptians were master astronomers using acoustic resonance to divine the future. You tilt your head skyward, wishing for a star chart or at least some Wi-Fi to Google what constellations align above you. Instead, you feel the cold weight of the granite ceiling, a reminder that this tomb was meant to last forever. Footsteps echo as you circle the sarcophagus once more. You catch the faintest glimmer in the polished granite floor, a smear of residual sand, ground so fine it glows under your light like pulverized pearls. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians polished these floors to ease the transport of the sarcophagus, or to symbolize the smooth journey of the soul after death. You rub your boot against the floor, leaving a dusty footprint, a tiny moment of rebellion in a room designed to prevent any trace of intrusion. You stand at the chamber's center, heart thumping, and imagine priests drumming a deep, resonant rhythm on hidden drums to awaken the pharaoh's spirit. No remnants of musical instruments have survived, yet fringe enthusiasts insist underground grooves outside the chamber held reed flutes to tune the stone resonance. You hum a few bars yourself, off-key and half asleep, until the echo makes you wince. Before you turn to leave, you lift your gaze to the far end of the chamber, where the entrance passage lies sealed by massive granite plugs. These blocks, each over 20 tons, were slid into place by levers and manpower, so incredible it boggles the modern mind. Historians still argue whether these plugs were final security measures, or symbolic boundaries marking the threshold between life and afterlife. You run your palm along the inner surface of one plug, imagining the workforce who hauled it up wooden sledges moistened with Nile water. Suddenly your cheek presses against cool stone, and you realize you've been leaning on it the entire time, eyes closed, lost in the chamber's hush. You blink, take a breath thick with ancient dust, and step back into the corridor's gloom, carrying the weight of the king's chamber's enigmas with you. You press onward, squeezing through the narrow gash of stone that marks the entrance to the pyramid's mysterious airshafts. Your shoulders brush limestone so ancient it still exudes the faintest warmth from millennia of sun. The corridor tapers quickly, forcing you into a sideways shuffle that feels like wriggling through some colossal stone python. Every breath kicks up dust, and each coughing fit echoes ominously. Just you, the stones, and a creeping sense that these narrow shafts guard secrets far beyond simple ventilation. A mainstream fact: in the Great Pyramid, there are 4 known shafts, 2 in the King's Chamber and 2 in the Queen's Chamber, each angled precisely to align with certain stars, possibly serving astronomical or religious functions. Historians still argue whether these channels guided the pharaoh's soul to the circumpolar stars or simply vented stale air from within. Your light catches the grimy walls as you inch forward. Tiny claw marks etch the limestone evidence, some say of ancient rodents scurrying in pitch-black corridors. Fringe enthusiasts claim those scratches came from jackal-headed Anubis guardians, scratching to compel the worthy forward. though your best guess is a family of overly ambitious mice. You imagine them scuttling alongside you, attending the same lost shafts tour, popcorn in tiny paws. Soon the passage becomes so tight, you feel the granite pressing in on your ribcage. You pause, heart pounding, and wonder if anyone's actually measured the cubic footage. Probably not. Space was at a premium when you're trying to build a tomb that doubles as a cosmic observatory. You remember reading that the southern shaft in the King's Chamber points toward Orion's belt, circa 250 while the northern aims at Thuban, the former North Star. Scholars still argue whether these alignments were intentional calibrations for afterlife navigation or coincidental byproducts of pyramid geometry. With each inch of forward progress, your elbow knocks against a faint inscription sprayed centuries ago. A worker's tag screaming G1C to mark the chamber above. That code refers to the Queen's Chamber, confusingly named because early explorers thought it housed Khufu's queen, though no evidence supports that usage. You chuckle at the misnomer. It's like naming your basement the ballroom when the party never arrived. The air grows stale and slightly cooler, as if each stone block sucks up warmth like a heat-hungry sponge. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, if you can call it that, given how little space you have to swing an arm. Your shadow flickers on the wall, warped by the shaft's gentle curvature. Fringe writers claim the curve was engineered to obscure the true destination, hiding secret chambers from looters. You mutter, "Great, so now even Google Maps can't help me." Halfway down, you hear a distant drip water seeping from rock fissures, building tension drop by drop. The sound bounces through the shaft, creating a staccato beat that feels hyperdramatic, like in a bad horror movie. You grin despite yourself. Of course there's no ghostly pharaoh chasing you, probably just groundwater. But historians still argue whether these water traces come from ancient Nile floods percolating through bedrock, or from modern irrigation raising the water table around Giza. Your foot catches on a lump of limestone protruding from the shaft floor, an intentional step carved to ease movement. Ancient builders left these footholds at regular intervals, like brutal climbing holds in a vertical gym. A quirky tidbit: in 1872, explorer Wayneman Dixon inserted a probe through one of these shafts, uncovering flanges and metal fittings, leading him to believe there might be hidden doors further in. No doors ever turned up, but the idea of iron handles inside a pyramid sounds like a hilarious IKEA prank. At the shaft's terminus in the Queen's Chamber, you emerge breathless into a small alcove. Your lamp illuminates an iron handle embedded in the stone, actually original fittings left by Dixon, corroded but still gripping the rock, like an over-enthusiastic rock climber's chalky hand. You tug gently, half expecting a secret panel to swing open and reveal untold treasures. Instead, you hear the faintest whisper of shifting dust, and nothing else. You feel momentarily cheated, until you recall that disappointment is part of the adventure. Squatting in the alcove, you peer into the handle's dark maw. It's just a stub of rusted metal, no passage further. Just a dead end that teased explorers for decades. You can almost hear Dixon's voice echoing, "Could it be a secret royal tomb?" only to slam into the same granite wall you're now facing. Historians still argue whether Dixon wasted his life chasing shadows or heroically catalogued pyramid oddities for future generations. Either way, you give Dixon a mental high five. Only in your cramped posture it feels more like an elbow in the chest. Turning back toward the King's Chamber shafts, you retrace your path in reverse, shoulders scraping and objects jingling in your pockets. You marvel at how these tiny conduits could have been scavenged by looters, only to lead nowhere like cosmic decoys. Some fringe fanatics suggest the shafts were never meant for humans at all, but for extraterrestrial craft guiding Pharaoh's spirits to starships parked in equatorial orbit, though you're pretty sure NASA missed that memo. Emerging again into the larger corridor, you breathe deeply, gulping in fresher air, and nearly hyperventilating from relief. Your lungs feel light, but your limbs are rubbery. Crawling through tight shafts is a surprisingly good upper body workout. You joke to yourself, forget CrossFit, sign me up for Pyramid Fit. And imagine a modern gym class doing deadlifts with limestone blocks. The trainers would definitely charge extra for ancient mummy wrapping lessons. You lean against the corridor wall, dust falling like confetti from your clothes. Ahead lies the Queen's Chamber proper, where these shafts originate, a room you'll reach soon enough. But for a moment you savor the freedom of open space. the feeling of air circulating freely around you, and the thought that you just traversed passages designed to confuse grave robbers and map the night sky. As you push off to continue, you pause once more to look back at the small, slanted openings. Their darkness invites and repels in equal measure. Were these channels celestial staircases, spiritual exhaust vents, or just ancient builders showing off their fancy star alignments? Historians still argue whether they symbolized the pharaoh's breath rising to the gods, or simply represented failed experiments in ancient H. You straighten your back, adjust your headlamp, and step forward, leaving the hidden shafts behind you. Their true purpose, still slumbering within the pyramid's heart, waiting for the next curious soul to squeeze inside and chase their own theories into the dark. You step into the queen's chamber and almost stumble over the smooth limestone floor, surprised by the sudden shift from cramped shafts to this unexpectedly spacious room. The ceiling here slopes upward more gently than the king's chamber, giving you a fleeting sense of relief, like finally finding the door in a maze of closets. The walls are bare, save for a few faint red ochre lines scrawled high above, barely visible in your headlamp's glow. Despite its grand name, this chamber never held a queen. Historians still argue whether it was intended as a symbolic resting place for the pharaoh's car, or simply an auxiliary room left unused. A mainstream fact, the queen's chamber lies almost at the geometric center of the Great Pyramid, situated on the pyramid's vertical axis and perfectly aligned east-west, suggesting a deliberate placement in the original design. You trace the precise horizontal groove that runs along the northern wall, a channel once thought to support wooden beams for heavy equipment during construction. Scholars still argue whether that beam slot was part of a sophisticated counterweight system, or just an anchoring point for scaffolding. You run your gloved finger across the groove and taste grit on your lip, gritty like the crust of a sand-encrusted croissant left out in the desert sun too long. A quirky tidbit: fringe writers claim that at dawn on the vernal equinox, sunlight streams through the ascending passage, illuminating a spot just above this groove, as if to signal the start of a celestial ceremony, though no one has ever timed it exactly. You shrug and joke aloud. If I wanted solar alignment, I'd just buy a sundial, and your chuckle echoes oddly in the empty chamber. In the chamber's center sits a mysterious rectangular niche carved into the floor, sometimes called the serdub by early explorers. You kneel and peer in. It's a shallow pit, too short for a coffin, and too wide for a simple offering table. Fringe enthusiasts whisper that this niche held a golden child sarcophagus, a replacement for the real queen's body smuggled out centuries ago by tomb robbers. You half expect to see glints of treasure in the shadows, but all you find is more limestone dust settling like cosmic snow. The air feels cooler here, as if the room itself has been sealed off since construction. You notice tiny pockmarks on the walls, marks left by diorite pounding stones, creating a subtle texture that reminds you of ripples on a desert floor. Mainstream archaeologists agree these indentations hint at organized work crews using specialized drill bits, though no one's found an actual copper drill bit inside any of the pyramid's chambers. Historians still argue whether these markings reflect ritual scarring to purify the stone or mere practical leftovers of carving. Your headlamp beam catches a small alcove to the east, accessible only by crawling through a low arch. You slide forward, dust puffing around you, and discover a tiny recess, carved barely big enough for a person's foot. You poke your toe in and realize it's empty, but you imagine it once held a jar of perfumed oils, or a statuette of Isis. A fringe rumor declares that Pharaoh's occultist priests hid secret scrolls here, scrolls that could unlock the mystery of eternal life, though no scroll fragments have ever surfaced. You grin at the thought, patting your jerkin pocket that holds only spare batteries. Rising slowly, you brush sand from your knees and study the chamber's proportions. The ceiling height here is roughly 8 cubits, just enough for a tall man to stand, yet the room's width is narrower than the king's chamber, giving it a cozier, more intimate feel. It's like standing inside a giant stone wine barrel, except thankfully without the risk of drunken pharaoh ghosts. You shift your weight and hear a soft clink, your own gear rattling, reminding you that you're the only living thing here, aside from the occasional bat or beetle. On the southern wall, you spot a strange outline, 2 shallow holes aligned horizontally, about chest high. Scholars still argue whether these sockets supported a wooden throne used in temple rituals, or were part of a bracing system to hold up internal scaffolding during construction. You crouch to inspect one hole, shining your light inside, It's smooth, polished, and free of debris, as if something heavy was mounted there for centuries. You tap around it, half expecting the wall to swing open, but it remains immovable, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. A sudden breeze gusts through the blocked entrance, teasing the loose sand at your feet. You inhale deeply, tasting that distinct limestone tang mixed with your own perspiration. A quirky theory suggests that these vents carry the scents of the desert into the tomb, letting the pharaoh's spirit savor his earthly domain. Though that sounds more like marketing for a boutique fragrance line. You laugh softly, wondering if Khufu ever complained about the lack of aromatherapy in his chambers. Your flashlight flickers as you approach the western wall, revealing faint incised symbols that almost look like tally marks or worker signatures. You bend low to examine them. Groups of 3 vertical strokes scratched into the soft limestone, superimposed by one long horizontal line. Fringe researchers interpret these as coded instructions for moving the megalithic beams above, but mainstream archaeologists lean towards simple graffiti notes left by bored laborers marking days worked or shares of the afternoon beer ration. Historians still argue whether these marks denote construction phases or secret initiation rites among the builders. Pausing in the chamber's center, you feel a subtle hum under your boots. So slight you're not sure if your imagination is playing tricks. You close your eyes momentarily, focusing on the vibration, ready to detect pulses of cosmic energy like a mystic tuning fork. When nothing happens, you open one eye and mutter, "Guess I left my crystals in the other jacket," then shiver as a bead of sweat trickles down your spine. Your light scans the ceiling, revealing a simple gabled roof, formed by 2 limestone slabs meeting at a ridge. Unlike the corbelled relieving chambers above the king's chamber, here there's no elaborate weight diversion. You wonder if that's why this room remained unused. It couldn't handle the pyramid's immense pressure. Scholars still argue whether the lack of relieving chambers contributed to minor cracks found in the eastern wall, cracks that were later filled with gypsum mortar by ancient repair teams. You trace one repaired crack with your fingertip, feeling the subtle ridge of patchwork. As you prepare to leave, you crouch by the blocked entrance and peer up at the rough-hewn stones sealing the chamber. These blocks don't match the precision of those deeper in the pyramid. They look roughly chiseled, almost slapped on. You imagine ancient workers, tired after months underground, laying down their tools for the last time, unconcerned with cosmic alignment or cosmic silence. A fringe story claims these were last-minute repairs after the pharaoh changed his mind on burial plans. But most experts dismiss that as fanciful storytelling. You stand and brush dust from your pants, your boots leaving footprints in the soft sand that will probably last until the next curious explorer arrives. You turn back for a final glance, half expecting the room to wink at you, its walls breathing with untold knowledge. Instead, there is only stillness and the echo of your own departing footsteps. You step through the low doorway, leaving behind the Queen's Chamber's oddities, the purposeless groove, the empty niche, the mysterious sockets, all reminders that some rooms were built not for use, but to keep use at bay. Historians still argue whether these design choices reflect religious symbolism or mere construction experiments. You swallow hard, tasting the dust and your own wonder, and press on toward the subterranean void below, eager to see what deeper secrets lie waiting. You step through the low passage left by Section 5's block doorway and find yourself descending a roughly hewn ramp that angles steeply into the earth, toward the subterranean void beneath the Great Pyramid. The light from above dwindles until all you can see is the faint beam of your headlamp, casting monstrous shadows on jagged walls. You trudge forward, boots crunching against uneven rubble, following a corridor chiseled directly into the natural bedrock. The air here has a damp chill, redolent of ancient limestone aquifers, and you realize your flashlight's flicker is the only heartbeat in this silent underworld. A mainstream fact, this lower chamber, often called the pit or subterranean chamber, lies more than 100 feet below the base of the pyramid, and was carved into the living rock as part of an early plan for Khufu's tomb, later abandoned in favor of higher chambers. Historians still argue whether this unfinished chamber represents a failed original burial plan, or simply served as a symbolic duat gateway to the underworld. You navigate around a series of roughly squared niches cut into the walls. These niches look far less polished than the upper chambers. No smooth floors, no corbelled ceilings, only sharp edges and tool marks gaunt as a skeleton's grin. Fringe theorists whisper that these niches once housed mechanical gadgets, Levers, wheels, or even a portal device to ferry the pharaoh's spirit directly into the Earth's core. You scoff at the idea of ancient wormholes beneath Giza, but there's a certain thrill imagining stargates hidden under tons of stone. The corridor opens into a vast, irregular chamber. Stalactites dangle from the ceiling, tiny, calcified teardrops formed over millennia by dripping groundwater. It feels more like a natural cave than a man-made tomb. You tiptoe over slick, mossy patches, praying the ground won't give way beneath you. Though praying is more a formality here. No priestly chants have echoed in this void for 4,000 years. Scholars still argue whether the Egyptians intended to incorporate this cavernous space into the pyramid's ritual design, or simply encountered unexpected fissures and halted work. Your headlamp illuminates a smear of crimson ochre on one wall, an intentional splash of pigment, not natural staining. You crouch to examine it. The pigment is roughly applied, in a sweeping arc that could have marked a ceremonial alignment or simply indicated where to stop carving. Fringe archaeologists suggest the red paint represented spilled blood from ritual sacrifices, though no organic residue remains. You lick your dry lips and joke, guess the pyramid's wine cellar was empty that day, before shaking your head and pressing on. To the left, a low tunnel branches off, partially collapsed, its entrance choked with limestone debris. You clear a few stones, your gloves scraping against rough flakes, and peer inside. The passage is scarcely tall enough for a crouched human, its floor slick with moisture. A dribble of water trickles down a crack, and you follow the sound until it pools into a shallow puddle under your boot. You cup your hands and catch a drop, tasting the mineral tang of groundwater that predates even the pyramid's stones. Historians still argue whether these drips come from ancient Nile seepage connecting to subterranean aquifers, or modern irrigation percolating through the plateau. You stand and look back at the main chamber, marveling at how the unfinished vault contrasts with the lofty majesty of the king's chamber above. It's as if you've slipped behind a polished showroom display into a rough delivery area, revealing engineering secrets and raw ambition. A quirky tidbit: some fringe writers claim this pit was where Khufu's builders tested miniature pyramids to perfect the angle of inclination, dumping failed models into the void, and you might just be standing atop a pile of discarded prototypes. You notice your footsteps leave impressions in damp earth, a stark departure from the fine sand and grit of the upper galleries. Each footprint dissolves into tiny rivulets of soil under dripping water, like ephemeral messages erased before anyone can read them. You imagine future explorers peering at your tracks, speculating on your identity, your tools, the brand of boots you wear. The idea makes you smile. This underground chamber remains a blank slate for thousands of years, and now you've left your own mark. Venturing deeper, you find a rectangular pit carved into the chamber's floor, a grotesque twin to the serdab in the Queen's chamber, but here left raw and unlined. It's deeper than a man is tall, and you peer over the edge. The stones below glisten with moisture. Fringe conspiracy blogs claim this pit was a sacrifice. Well, where ritual offerings tumbled to appease chthonic deities. You resist throwing in your spare flashlight battery as an offering, though you half expect that to grant you safe passage out. Your headlamp beam catches an alcove to the right, where a pile of broken limestone blocks lies like a ruin within a ruin. Some blocks bear chisel grooves, others chipped corners, as if workers left in haste, abandoning tools and stones mid-project. You pick up a fragment. Its edge is sharp, and you admire the clear demarcation between rough quarry stone and finished surface. The quality differential reminds you of the ship pit area outside the pyramid, where giant cedar boats were assembled, projects halted or moved as priorities shifted. Historians still argue whether unfinished spaces like this reflect logistical pivots during construction, or abrupt changes mandated by the pharaoh himself. You set the stone fragment down gently, afraid it might disintegrate in your leather gloves. A faint echo drifts from deeper recesses, a muffled thump like distant heartbeats. You freeze, pulse spiking, but decide it's probably just falling debris, or your imagination throwing a late-night horror soundtrack. A playful part of you whispers, "Release the mummy." You roll your eyes. It's always best to keep the jokes informal here, lest you start believing them. Walking back toward the chamber's exit, you notice a curve in the rock wall you hadn't seen before, almost like a hidden corridor half blocked by rubble. You brush away stones, revealing the butt end of a hewn passage that angles upward. It looks deliberate, a planned extension left unfinished. your mind races. Could this lead to an even deeper network of tunnels? Imagine undiscovered rooms hidden beneath the pyramid's colossal weight. Scholars still argue whether any undiscovered chambers lie in this subterranean network, or if today's ground-penetrating radar has already ruled out significant voids. You press your shoulder against the passage and test the pitch. It slopes upward at roughly 15 degrees. You can just stand if you crouch and shuffle forward. The darkness ahead is absolute, an invitation and a challenge. You consider exploring further, but remember your promise to yourself: no unplanned detours. You laugh softly, recalling your jeer in Section 2 about sending a GoPro down these shafts. You tap your pocket to ensure your spare battery, GoPro, and headlamp remain handy. Turning back, you place a small cairn of stones at the hidden corridor's mouth, a marker for your return. The cool air whips around you as you retrace your steps, each echo of your footsteps a callback to the ancient builder's rhythmic chiseling. You pause at the base of the original ramp, looking up toward the faint glow of chambers you left behind. It feels like returning to a sunlit reality after wandering in a dream. Standing at the threshold, you take a deep breath, tasting musty earth and limestone. You glance back, once more at the unfinished chambers, walls smudged with ochre, pits hollowed into stone, and that mysterious lost corridor beckoning. A surge of gratitude sweeps through you. Not every explorer gets to descend here, to walk the line between natural cave and monumental tomb. You pocket your sense of wonder and step upward, leaving the subterranean void behind, but carrying its dark secrets in your mind. You press onward from the subterranean shadows and emerge into a larger gallery, where the stonework suddenly broadens into an awe-inspiring panorama of architectural wonders. Here, in the Great Pyramid's heart, the precision of the masonry forces you to pause, your jaw slack as you take in courses of limestone blocks so evenly cut that the seams are invisible to the naked eye. It feels like stepping into a cosmic cathedral where every joint and corner was measured by gods wearing calipers. A mainstream fact: the ancient Egyptians achieved tolerances as tight as 0.5 millimeters between blocks, using copper tools, stone hammers, and ingenious leveling methods that predate modern theodolites by thousands of years. Historians still argue whether workers relied on water-filled trenches as primitive spirit levels, or used sighting rods and plumb bobs to achieve such perfection. You run your fingers along a perfectly flat joint, feeling the micro-scratches where craftsmen honed the surfaces with quartz sand. Fringe aficionados insist those scratches are evidence of power tools left behind by alien visitors, zapping stones with plasma torches to carve flawless edges. You laugh at the mental image of little green engineers in coveralls, clipboard in tentacled hand, muttering, "Hold still, this beam's slightly off-axis." Astoundingly, the pyramid's four sides align almost exactly with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west, deviating by mere arc minutes. You shine your light along a course of blocks, and the line cuts through darkness like an arrow. Scholars still argue whether this alignment was achieved by tracking circumpolar stars, observing sun shadows at equinox, or by some vanished surveying technique that we haven't yet rediscovered. You tilt your head skyward and wish for GPS, but whispered against the chamber walls it sounds like a heresy. Ahead you reach a section where the blocks suddenly shift in size. Enormous monoliths weighing upwards of 70 tons sit cheek by jowl with smaller blocks weighing under 2 tons. This graduated sizing was likely a structural necessity. Heavier stones placed low to bear weight, lighter stones higher up to reduce stress on the summit. A quirky tidbit: some builders carved small pyramidal markers into certain blocks, perhaps to denote their placement or orientation, leaving tiny "You are here" arrows that only insiders could decipher. You squint at a faint pyramid-shaped glyph and joke, "I'd follow that arrow, but I left my treasure map in the tour bus." The gallery ceiling arches overhead, formed by a series of corbelled courses that step inward until they meet in a gentle vault, an early experiment in spanning large spaces without lintels. It's like primitive buttressing before Gothic cathedrals made it cool. Engineers still debate whether these corbels were structural necessities added after initial roof cracks appeared, or part of the original design ethos. You glance upward, half expecting a piece of ceiling to crumble on your head. Then remember that these stones have borne 4,500 years of weight without a single collapse. You step onto the smooth limestone floor, polished so finely it almost glows under your lamp. It's hard to believe that every surface here was finished by hand, using abrasive sand mixed with water and rubbed with dolerite blocks. A fringe rumor claims the Egyptians dipped stones in vinegar to accelerate abrasion, but that would have eaten away the lime. You're not convinced. You imagine a bored worker stirring a vat of vinegar and saying, "Maybe this'll help," or give the boss heartburn. At a sudden bend in the corridor, you come upon a curious irregularity, a single massive block that protrudes slightly, its face intentionally recessed by about an inch. It's a deliberate bond block, locking two walls together at a crucial stress point. Mainstream archaeologists note that bond blocks like these prevent the pyramid's faces from bulging outward under weight. Historians still argue whether bond blocks were strategically placed based on pre-computed load diagrams or adjusted on the fly when workers observed minor shifts in the structure. You prod the recess with a gloved finger, feeling the reassuring sturdiness of interlocked stone. Suddenly your lamp flickers and shadows dance across the walls, conjuring phantom doorways that don't exist. You mutter, "Spare me the mummy ambush," and the echo seems to snicker back. You remind yourself, this isn't Hollywood. There are no sliding panels triggered by hidden pressure plates here. Or maybe there are. That's the thrill of it. A long gallery opens up, its ceiling rising to double the height of the corridors you've left behind. Sunlight from the entrance behind filters in, illuminating dust motes that swirl like tiny galaxies, turning the chamber into a cathedral of suspended particles. You pause in the center, stretching your arms wide, as if embracing the pyramid itself. It feels like an inside joke between you and Khufu's builders. Thousands of years separate you, yet you occupy the same space, breathing the same ancient air. Just then, you notice a subtle crack at the corner where two walls meet, filled long ago with white chips and mortar. This Egyptian caulk was used to repair minor fractures and maintain the pyramid's integrity. Fringe conspiracy blogs call it alien superglue, claiming the mortar's magical binding properties rival modern adhesives. You poke at the mortar line. It's hard but crumbly like day-old chalk. You joke, "Nice try, little green men." Continuing down the gallery, you reach an area where several blocks are missing, replaced by modern reinforcements of steel beams and wood planks. Archaeologists installed these in the 1950s to prevent potential collapse from centuries of wear. You duck under a steel support and feel about half an inch of give in the stone above. Reassuring proof that conservation efforts work. Historians still argue whether such reinforcements compromise the pyramid's authenticity or ensure its survival for future generations. Your path curves into another narrow corridor, but your mind lingers on the sheer scale of what you've seen. The thousands of blocks meticulously tuned to bear unimaginable loads, the mathematical precision aligning each face to the stars, the ingenious structural solutions forged by human hands. You almost feel guilty making jokes in a space so laden with silent genius, but the chamber seems to wink back, its gravity lifting your spirits. You pause at a bond-projecting block, remembering the phrase from Section 2 about pyramid movement. Under its own weight, the Great Pyramid shifts by millimeters each century. This gallery is part of that living organism. You place your palm flat against the warm limestone and imagine the slow creep of stone, the whisper of geological time pressing outward. It's humbling and slightly vertigo-inducing, like standing on a shifting ice floe in the Arctic. A sudden gust of wind rattles your lantern, though the passage ahead is sealed by stone on all sides. You chuckle. Even the pyramid's got jokes. You shake your head and shine your light through the bond block recess, picturing tiny ancient surveyors with measuring ropes and sighting instruments, working under the hot sun to map out perfect right angles. No power drills, no lasers, just sweat, ingenuity, and probably a good deal of grumbling over beer rations. As you step away from the corbelled ceiling and align yourself once more with the corridor's axis, you sense the tension between perfection and imperfection. Smooth planes interrupted by repair seams, flawless joints marked by crudely filled cracks, instruments of precision wielded by mortal hands. This grand edifice is a testament to ambition, faith, and the stubborn durability of human craftsmanship. You adjust your pack, feeling its weight settle across your shoulders, and prepare to move on. Behind you, the gallery stands silent, its architectural wonders and engineering headaches forever intertwined like stones in a tightly hewn seam. Ahead lies the Airshaft Enigma of Section 8, but for now, you linger in gratitude for these moments of clarity amid ancient puzzles. You press forward from the broad gallery into a narrowing corridor that funnels you toward the pyramid's most notorious mysteries, the airshafts. Your shoulders brush limestone so finely dressed it feels like paper, yet your pathway constricts until you're practically hugging the walls. The air here is stale, thick with ancient dust and the faint tang of minerals, but it carries a whisper of movement, as if the pyramid exhales through these slender channels. You pause and take a deep breath, tasting grit and suspense on your tongue. A mainstream fact: there are 4 known shafts in the Great Pyramid. 2 rising from the King's Chamber and 2 from the Queen's Chamber, each carved at precise angles to meet specific points in the sky, demonstrating the ancient Egyptians' advanced astronomical knowledge. Historians still argue whether these shafts served purely symbolic roles, guiding the pharaoh's soul to the circumpolar stars, or functioned as rudimentary ventilation ducts to clear the air in sealed chambers. You inch into the southern shaft of the King's Chamber and immediately regret wearing your backpack with the rattling water bottle. Your elbow clicks against limestone so smoothly worn that it feels polished by centuries of sandblasts. Fringe theorists claim these shafts were actually soul elevators, channels through which the living could send messages to departed pharaohs, or vice versa, like cosmic Skype calls, only less lag. You flash a grin at the thought of ancient Egyptians debating signal strength and whether Ra had Wi-Fi. The shaft slopes upward at roughly 45 degrees, forcing you to crouch and shuffle in clammy darkness. Your headlamp captures faint tool marks, horizontal scoring from copper chisels, followed by vertical grooves from dolerite pounders. Mainstream archaeologists agree these techniques allowed builders to carve the shafts with remarkable straightness, despite lacking modern guides or lasers. Historians still argue whether workers used wooden guides pegged into the limestone or mere eyeballing aided by water levels. It's probably more impressive that they didn't accidentally tunnel into the king's counterfeit burial chamber below. You tap the rock beside you, and your knuckles thud back a dull hollow note. It's spooky until you remember that whole hypersonic hymn hall bit from section 2 and you hum a few bars of Greensleeves to see if resonance changes. It doesn't, unless your ears are playing tricks after hours underground. In the dim glow, a tiny scratch on the wall catches your eye, an inscription in red ochre, maybe left by a workman marking his crew's progress. You squint but can't decipher the characters. It could say Crew A, snack break here, or beware slippery spots. Historians still argue whether paint remnants here were construction markers or ritual offerings to deities watching over the build. Lower down, the shaft narrows abruptly into what feels like a stone gullet. You wonder if you could wriggle further. Probably not without sacrificing a shoulder or two, so you lean in close and peer upward at the distant pinprick of light, where the shaft penetrates the pyramid's outer casing. It glows like a star trapped in rock. Fringe enthusiasts insist that a perfect mercury mirror placed at that spot would reflect the pharaoh's car directly into the heavens. You imagine a tiny bowl of quicksilver wobbling at the edge of the pyramid and shiver at the sophistication of such an installation right up until you remember quicksilver poisoning. Turning back, you slip into the northern shaft of the king's chamber, angling in the opposite direction. This one points toward Thuban, the ancient North Star at the time of Khufu's reign. You tap the floor, and your fingers leave dusty prints on the uneven ledge, carved for unknown reasons. A mainstream fact: the shafts are about 8 inches square in cross-section, requiring precision work to maintain consistent dimensions over their entire length. Historians still argue whether such exactitude was achieved by repeated measurement or by using master templates dragged along the walls. Either way, your own thumbprint now joins a long line of human impressions. As you crawl, you recall your remark in section 4 about the Dixon handles in the Queen's Chamber, those tiny iron fittings that teased explorers for decades. You joked no low-budget horror show would follow, but here, engulfed by sandstone, you half expect a sudden clang echoing from above. Instead, you hear only your own rasping breath and the soft crunch of dust under your boots. You whisper, "Sorry, no hidden doors down here," though you're not entirely convinced. After all, those shafts end blindly, or so you've been told. You swallow an inch into the Queen's Chamber shafts, emerging briefly into the larger room before ducking into its companion passages. These are shorter, shallower, and less precisely angled, almost like practice runs for their King's Chamber counterparts. Fringe rumor calls them decoys. Builders might have carved preliminary shafts only to redirect them later, confusing any would-be tomb robbers who dared navigate the pyramid's innards. You smirk at that, ancient booby traps without the booby part. A gentle breeze tickles your neck as you transition between shafts and chamber, A reminder that even the darkest crevices connect to the open air above. You lift your face toward the chamber ceiling, recalling the polished floor where you left your pyramid-fit footprints in Section 4. Now, airborne dust motes drift around you like tiny galaxies, proof that these shafts do circulate air, however faintly. Mainstream engineers suggest that temperature differentials between interior and exterior create convective currents, pulling in cooler air and expelling warmer pockets. A rudimentary but effective system. Historians still argue whether the shafts were designed with ventilation in mind, or if air movement was merely a lucky byproduct. In the Queen's Chamber northern shaft, you notice a slight bend halfway along, an engineering oddity that would frustrate any modern surveyor. It's a kink so minor you might miss it, yet it shifts the trajectory just enough to avoid intersecting the King's shafts. Fringe authors argue it was intentional, a hidden escape route or alignment with a secret constellation. You chuckle, picturing engineers arguing, "No, make it a hairpin turn," while foremen rolled their eyes and pointed surveying rods. You emerge at last into the open desert light through a small aperture in the pyramid's casing. An exit originally inaccessible until door panels were removed by modern archaeologists. You squint against the sun, blinking away the shadows. After hours underground, the desert wind feels like a cool brine wash, and you taste freedom, mixed with the grit of your journey. You stretch arms that ache from crouching, feeling muscles you didn't know you had. CrossFit might have nothing on Pyramid Fit, you muse, recalling your own joke about limestone workouts. Standing on the plateau, you glance back at the pyramid's facade, each block now a silent witness to the shafts that breathe through its heart. You imagine them as silent veins, pulsing with cosmic purpose or mere drafts, depending on whose theory you favor today. A quirky tidbit. Drone surveys in recent years found subtle thermal anomalies above shaft exits, hinting at airflow still active after 4 millennia. No one's bottled that breeze yet, but you can almost feel its cool brush on your cheek. You take a final look at the small openings, 2 on either side of the pyramid's midsection, wondering if they're star portals, ventilation vents, or simply elegant architectural experiments. Historians still argue whether the shafts symbolize the pharaoh's breath rising to the gods, or were practical solutions to preserve the pyramid's interior. You tip your head up to the sky as though seeking approval from Orion's belt itself. Yet all you see are modern jets tracing contrails overhead, a reminder that human curiosity never stops carving new pathways. With a deep inhale, you step away, letting the desert sunlight dry the sweat on your brow and warm your skin. You'll carry the grooves of those shafts in your mind. The tight squeezes, the tool marks, the thin threads of breeze that guided you through darkness. Each narrow tunnel is a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the mysteries we're content to leave unsolved. Ahead lies Section 9's lost treasure Fantasies, where gold-chasing tales await. But for now, you savor the memory of airshafts, those slender arteries that may have kept tomb robbers at bay, guided souls skyward, or merely let ancient builders test their skill. Whatever the truth, these shafts remain one of the pyramid's most enduring enigmas, their quiet draft whispering across time. You step into a low-ceilinged gallery where the air feels charged with the echoes of imagined wealth, as though the very stones remember gleaming gold and glittering jewels once destined for these secret chambers. The torchlight from your headlamp flickers across walls scarred by 19th century gunpowder blasts, evidence of Colonel Howard Vyse's infamous treasure hunt in 1837, when he resorted to blasting through solid masonry in hopes of uncovering a hoard of Khufu's riches. You probably won't find that chamber intact, but hey, it makes for a dramatic backdrop. A mainstream fact: Vyse's use of gunpowder revealed several hidden rooms, now called the Vyse Chambers, above the Grand Gallery, though they contained nothing but rubble and modern graffiti left by his team. Historians still argue whether these chambers were original storage vaults, later cleared by ancient looters, or mere structural voids, intentionally left by the builders as part of weight relief systems. You run your hand along a rough patch of scarred stone, feeling a network of hairline fractures where blasting soot still clings, centuries after the echo faded. Fringe enthusiasts whisper that Vyse's charges accidentally triggered a secret mechanism, sealing off the true treasure vault forever in a self-locking tomb. You imagine 19th century engineers scratching their heads amid the rubble. "We blew it up again," one might have muttered before pocketing a stray gold leaf as a consolation prize. Drifting deeper, you recall the popular legend of Caliph al-Ma'mun, who supposedly tunneled into the Great Pyramid around 8020 CE in search of wealth. Mainstream scholars doubt the details. No contemporary records confirm his expedition, but the story persists that the Caliph bribed local workmen to carve a new entrance, only to find one small niche filled with common pottery and broken tools. Historians still argue whether al-Ma'mun ever entered the true inner sanctum or was deliberately misled by tribal custodians protecting Khufu's resting place. You imagine the Caliph's frustration, staff in one hand and dusty scroll in the other, proclaiming, "By Allah, where's the gold?" only to discover a pile of ancient chisel heads and chipped amphorae, hardly the loot he'd hoped for. A quirky tidbit: some versions of the tale claim al-Ma'mun's archaeologists left hurried graffiti in red paint bearing his name, hidden marks recently spotted in low-light photographs, though most Egyptologists dismiss them as modern hoaxes. You press on toward a sealed corridor rumored to have once held a treasure chamber stocked with electrum leaf and lapis lazuli vessels. Fringe conspiracy blogs argue that the corridor leads to a secondary sarcophagus room containing Khufu's solid gold mask, lost to history when the Egyptians withdrew the gold to refurbish temple shrines during later dynasties. You run your finger along the groove of an old ceiling block, half-expecting it to slide aside as if you're starring in a low-budget Indiana Jones reboot. Spoiler, it does. The gallery slopes upward, and you catch sight of a faint inscription on the western wall. A stylized G1A marker left by early explorers, signifying the first chamber vice breached. You lean closer, wiping dust from the carving, and imagine the thrill of those initial chisels cracking the limestone veneer. A mainstream fact, these early incursions disturbed invaluable evidence of construction techniques, prompting modern archaeologists to bemoan the loss of pristine data. Scholars still argue whether the damage from those treasure hunts caused more harm than any ancient earthquake could have. A sudden breeze rattles the sandstone beneath your boots, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic from the desert's edge. A reminder that the world outside still chases gold, albeit in paper currency rather than tomb chambers. You joke, at least stock markets don't require gunpowder, and your echo bounces back like a chuckle from the pharaoh himself. Turning a corner, you encounter a small alcove sealed with a rough limestone block, its face pockmarked by tool marks rather than blasting scorch. You kneel and examine the block's edges. They're too rough for official closures, suggesting someone pried it open long ago, then left it crudely replaced. Fringe theorists seize on this as proof of clandestine excavations during WWI. Rumor has it, German officers sought the pyramid's treasure to fund their war machine. You shake your head. Secret Nazi expeditions in Giza. More likely an internet bedtime story concocted after one too many conspiracy documentaries. You press your shoulder against the block and wiggle it. Nothing moves. You quarter turn and mutter, "If only I'd brought more elbow grease." The stones laugh back in their silent way. You rise and step back, dust settling like golden confetti whether you find treasure or not. Your path narrows again, and you descend a few rough steps into a corridor with walls streaked by centuries of groundwater seepage. These rivulets etch channels where gold dust might once have mingled, only to wash away into deeper crevices. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians intentionally allowed water to flow here to hide treasure from looters, or if they simply didn't anticipate the long-term impact of a rising water table. You trace a damp streak with a fingertip, leaving a clean line. In the dim glow, you notice faint tool grooves on the ceiling, parallel lines that fringe writers interpret as tracks for an ancient pulley system used to hoist treasure chests into hidden vaults. You tilt your head and imagine workers hauling golden arc containers up those channels, only to spill jewels when the pulley jammed. You stifle a laugh, picturing a gemstone avalanche burying panicked crews in emeralds and garnets. Emerging into a larger chamber, you're greeted by the broken remains of a niche once thought to be the fabled treasure room. Now it's empty, just a hollow square in the wall, its interior coated in thick dust and occasional pebbles. A mainstream fact: no chamber in the Great Pyramid has ever yielded organized caches of precious metals or gemstones. All recovered artifacts were utilitarian: pottery shards, copper tools, and occasional wooden fragments. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians removed valuables long before pyramid collapse, or if treasures were intended for temples rather than tombs. You sit on the chamber floor, brushing grit from your palms, and imagine the disappointment of every treasure hunter who came before you. You recall that Victorian-era accounts spoke of pockets of gold foil lining certain niches, later found to be mica flakes mistaken for gold. You can't help but grin at thought of early explorers pocketing glittery flakes only to find they'd looted rocks. All that glitters is not gold, the proverb warns, and echoing through stone corridors, it feels like the ultimate punchline. A distant drip echoes like a death knell in the quiet chamber. You stand, dusting off your knees, and shine your light toward the exit. You realize you've spent hours chasing legends, chasing whispers of wealth, never meant to be found. Fringe blogs claim that the true treasure lies not in gold, but in hidden hieroglyphic scrolls, smuggled out and locked away in secret vaults beneath Cairo. You shake your head and pat your pocket. Just spare batteries and a granola bar. As you approach the passage back to sunlight, you glance over your shoulder at the empty niche one last time. Its silence speaks louder than any imagined hoard. You inhale the heavy air, tasting grit and maybe a hint of regret for the unfulfilled promises of riches. Yet there's a peculiar comfort here. Some treasures aren't measured in carats. Stepping into the bright desert light, you squint against the sun, feeling sand cling to your clothes. You smile, remembering that for every myth of gold buried beneath these stones, there's a real treasure in the story itself. Human ambition, hope, and the eternal chase for the unknown. Historians still argue whether this chase distracts from the pyramid's true marvels or enhances our fascination with them. And you, dusty explorer, are the proof that both can be true. A mainstream fact: the earliest known pyramid texts appear in the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, around 275 BCE, making it the first royal tomb to preserve these funerary spells intended to ensure the pharaoh's resurrection and safe passage through the underworld. Historians still argue whether Khufu's Great Pyramid ever bore similar texts. No definitive inscriptions have been found here, but a few faint glyph fragments at lower elevations hint at lost carvings wiped away by centuries of looting and restoration attempts. You step into a low-lit gallery, the walls ahead suddenly alive with rows of carved hieroglyphs, their shadows flickering over ancient stone like ghostly script in a candlelit study. The air here is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of limestone and time-worn pigments. As you advance, you realize these aren't construction marks or scribbled workman's tags. They're deliberate inscriptions, spells meant to guide and protect, etched deep into the heart of the pyramid. Your headlamp beam skims the glyphs, a series of small humanoid figures, stylized birds and serpentine lines coiling across the stone surface. Fringe enthusiasts whisper these are star maps in code, guiding Khufu's soul along cosmic highways toward Orion's belt and the circumpolar stars. You trace a looping line with your fingertip, imagining it lit by celestial fire, a glowing breadcrumb trail through the dark. It makes you smile, recalling the stellar alignments you crawled through in Section 8, but now the blueprint is on the wall, not in the shafts. Between the pictograms you notice faint grooves, where red ochre once filled the indentations, giving the symbols fresh color. Scholars still argue whether these pigments were applied as part of an initiation ritual, activating the spells with sacramental paint, or were purely decorative, added by later priests who refurbished the chamber for new ceremonies centuries after Khufu's reign. You hold your palm to the wall, tasting dust mixed with the slightest tang of iron from the ancient pigment. As you circle the gallery, a larger panel comes into view, its carvings remarkably well preserved. You identify the famous opening of the mouth ritual, where priests restore senses to the deceased, ensuring the pharaoh can see, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. Mainstream Egyptologists agree this rite became central from the Old Kingdom onward. Its significance echoed in tomb paintings and funerary texts. Historians still argue whether the ritual's inclusion here was meant for Khufu himself, or added later by caretakers maintaining the cult of the dead. One cluster of hieroglyphs stands out, a sequence depicting the jackal-headed god Anubis, leading a bark through a star-studded sky. A quirky tidbit: fringe theorists claim that if you recite these glyphs in reverse order under a full moon, you'll awaken a pharaoh's spirit who whispers back the secrets of pyramid construction. You mumble the glyph names backwards, Sufa, Subna, and the stone remains silent, but you can't help the shiver that tickles your spine. The room feels charged as you read the glyphs. May your bones be strong, may your limbs move freely, may your life be restored like the rising sun. The words swell in your mind, like an incantation, and you can almost hear distant chanting reverberating through stone corridors. You replay in your head the hum you imagined in the king's chamber. Section 3. This must have been the source, the literal words that accompanied that cosmic vibration. A narrow ledge beneath the inscriptions holds a tiny recessed niche, its enamel darkened with residue. You kneel and peer inside. A smudge of dark resin remains on the floor, perhaps an offering of myrrh or cedar oil. Fringe rumors suggest this cavity contained a scroll inscribed on linen, the only known papyrus lost to time, holding the complete Book of Gates for safe passage beyond the Dua. You dip a gloved finger and taste the resin's faint piney bitterness. No scroll, but a tangible link to those long-ago rituals. Your light moves to a series of small, nearly identical hieroglyphs, stamped repeatedly along the lower register, tiny stamps showing the name of a high priest, repeated as if to brand the chamber with his authority. Mainstream scholars believe these repetitions are ownership marks, denoting priests responsible for maintaining each spell. Historians still argue whether such repetitive stamps served a magical purpose, multiplying the potency of the incantations, or were bureaucratic signatures in the afterlife's paperwork. You pass a group of glyphs accompanied by a crudely carved sketch of a snake uncoiling over a solar disk. It feels like a child's doodle next to the formal inscriptions, a quirky fringe interpretation. This was drawn by a bored apprentice who wanted to sign his work with a pet cobra sketch, his ancient meme. You laugh softly, remembering the graffiti from Section 5 where workmen complained about stolen lunches. It seems even royal tombs couldn't escape the urge to sign one's name or doodle one's pet. In the gallery's furthest corner, the inscriptions coalesce into an elaborate vignette. The pharaoh rising from his sarcophagus, arms outstretched, eyes turned skyward. Above, the winged goddess Nut arches across the ceiling, her body adorned with gold leaf traces that once shimmered under flickering torchlight. Mainstream researchers agree that Nut's protective role is central in pyramid texts, shielding the deceased as he journeys through starry realms. Historians still argue whether the original gold leaf was applied in situ or added by later restorers seeking to recapture the tomb's former splendor. You shine your light upward and notice fine drill holes surrounding Nut's image, tiny nubs where faint wires may have anchored additional decorative elements. Fringe blogs jump on this as evidence of lost pyramid technology, wiring the walls like a modern theatre set. You tug your collar, imagining hidden circuits lighting up ancient scenes. Of course, no wires exist, just hollow drill holes and your own overactive imagination. Your mind drifts back to the corridor in Section 2, the one with diagonal grooves said to amplify chanting. Here you see complementary carvings, suggesting priests once gathered in this chamber to recite these spells in unison, their voices merging with stone resonance. Some researchers still argue whether these gatherings were public ceremonies open to the elite, or secret rites performed only by royal cult initiates. You can almost hear their voices rising, a murmur through time. As you approach the exit, you pause at a faint inscription half erased by centuries of moisture. The phrase, Ankh Wedja Sineb, life, prosperity, health. It's the final blessing for the departed, a wish you now silently cast upon yourself. Mainstream Egyptologists note this formula's ubiquity in funerary contexts, a constant refrain across dynasties. Historians still argue whether its placement here was meant to reassure living visitors that the tomb was duly consecrated, or to ward off those who enter uninvited. You step back to admire the sheer scale of it all. Walls once painted, spells recited, offerings made, and rituals enacted in this sacred space. A fringe suggestion claims that if you circumnavigate the gallery 7 times while singing the glyphs, you unlock a hidden vault under the floor. You consider it, then smirk and start a slow circle, humming the opening of the mouth text. When you finish, nothing happens, aside from your own dizziness. Stepping into the next corridor, you leave behind the strange pyramid texts, their promises etched in stone, their power whispered by history, and their true purpose still echoing in scholarly debates. Your fingertips linger on the closing glyphs and slide down the cool limestone toward the doorway. The gallery falls into semi-darkness behind you, the spell-carved walls surrendering to shadow. You take a final breath heavy with dust and incense ghosts, feeling the weight of those ancient words settle in your own soul. You step into a narrow corridor where the walls seem to lean in conspiratorially, their seams whispering of doors that shouldn't exist, secret portals designed to deceive tomb robbers and thrill modern explorers alike. Your headlamp's beam catches a faint outline on the northern wall, a rectangular frame carved so precisely that it could only have been a hidden door, masked by millennia of dust and shadow. You press your palm against the flat stone, imagining mechanisms of lock and lever once hidden just out of sight, waiting to spring open at the right moment. A mainstream fact. Early explorers like Colonel Vyse and Nathaniel Davison reported finding several false doors in the Great Pyramid's internal chambers, stone panels indistinguishable from the surrounding masonry until probed or chipped away. Historians still argue whether these false doors were intentional security measures to mislead looters, or simply byproducts of construction errors later repurposed by thieves. You trace the fine groove around the panel, feeling a slight depression indicating where a concealed hinge might once have been. Fringe enthusiasts claim that some false doors hid miniature sarcophagi filled with gold leaf or papyrus scrolls, only to vanish when explorers returned with better tools. You picture those disappointed treasure hunters, their chisels buzzing against granite, only to uncover empty voids echoing back their own curses. The corridor walls bear numerous chisel marks that don't align with the original construction patterns, evidence perhaps of early 19th century treasure seekers hacking at the stone. On one side you spot a cluster of drill holes arranged in a triangular pattern, left over from 19th century attempts to bore through the masonry without disturbing the external casing. A quirky tidbit: fringe writers assert that those triangular drill patterns encoded secret maps, each hole pointing toward a buried cache of Electrum artifacts somewhere beneath the Giza Plateau. You tap your finger against the drill holes and wince at the memory of your own dentist's more efficient handiwork. Moving deeper, you pass a low archway leading to what was once thought to be a false chamber. The walls inside are rougher, with haphazard tool marks and mud mortar patches that stand out against the pristine limestone of genuine rooms. You crouch to inspect a section patched with darker mortar, clearly a post-construction repair. Historians still argue whether those patches indicate collapsed false doors hastily sealed by ancient workers, or later interventions by archaeologists who tried to restore the pyramid's interior to original condition. You shine your light across the east wall and notice a slight discoloration outlining a doorway so perfectly concealed you almost miss it. You kneel, dust motes swirling around you, and press on the stone only to hear a hollow click. Your chest tightens for a moment, but the panel doesn't budge. Evidently bricks of rubble were wedged behind to keep it jammed shut. It's thrilling to know that mechanism remains intact, yet frustrating not to witness its reveal. You murmur, "Thanks for nothing, Khufu," and the stone remains unmoved. Continuing, you round a corner into a small niche where explorers in the 19th century once tentatively chiseled a narrow slot, their crude attempt to peer behind the walls. The slot is barely wide enough for your fingertip, and you slide in your gloved hand, feeling the cool void beyond. Inside, you grasp at nothing but empty space and crumbling limestone chips. Historians still argue whether that niche was originally designed for ritual offerings, a false shrine to distract intruders, or simply an early test hole made by a bored stonemason marking the completion of a work shift. You take a deep breath, tasting dust and anticipation, and move on toward another corridor, where legend holds that a secret door swings open only when the sun's rays hit a specific angle at dawn on the winter solstice. Fringe blogs claim that every December, amateur archaeologists gather at the pyramid's southern face, wielding laser pointers in hopes of triggering a hidden latch far above. You laugh, imagining laser leaves, zapping ancient locks, only to recall that modern surveys have found no evidence of solar-activated mechanisms. Yet the myth endures because who doesn't love a good Stone Age Rube Goldberg? A faint breeze drifts through this passage, carrying the echo of distant traffic and a hint of desert sand. You smell it, that faint, dry sweetness that reminds you of the Sahara's dusk. It sneaks under every door groove and through every crack, suggesting that the pyramid is less airtight than its mystical reputation implies. Scholars still argue whether the pyramid's builders intended total sealing of inner chambers, or whether they accepted minimal ventilation as a necessary compromise. Either way, that breeze offers comfort. You're alive, breathing free air, not trapped behind a granite door. Your torchlight catches a symmetrical pair of rectangular outlines on the west wall, twin false doors bracketing a patch of patched stone. You crouch to examine the lower outline, noticing fine tool marks that differ from the original masonry. Someone recarved this panel, likely in the early days of Egyptology when explorers hoped to unearth secret passageways into undisturbed sanctuaries. You imagine torch-bearing teams chipping away, only to find spiderwebs and scorpions, their disappointment echoing through time as hollow clanks inside these vaults. As you continue, you enter a wider gallery where a single, oversized block interrupts the seamless course of limestone. The block is slightly offset. It seems too prominent to be accidental. You press against it, and it shudders under your weight, just enough to remind you of its precarious positioning. Fringe theorists delight in suggesting this block was a disguised trapdoor, capable of dropping unwelcome intruders into a lower pit chamber, an ancient booby trap perfected by Khufu's architects. You hesitate to test the theory, recalling stories from Section 6 about the subterranean void and the risk of falling into a wet, bat-infested pit. Instead, you continue around the block, stepping lightly over debris and feeling the rough gravel crunch beneath your boots. A mainstream fact: no verified booby traps exist within the Great Pyramid. Ancient Egyptians trusted the complexity of the internal layout and false doors to deter thieves rather than crude mechanical traps. Historians still argue whether the reliance on architectural confusion was more effective than hidden pitfalls, but you're inclined to trust the designer's sophistication over Hollywood's dramatization. Approaching the corridor's end, you come upon a final false door, its panel flush with the surrounding wall and decorated with shallow grooves, mimicking the outer casing's pattern. You crouch low and shine your light at an oblique angle, revealing a minuscule catch carved into the lower right corner. Curious, you slide a small rock into the catch and attempt to lever the panel. Nothing moves. You sigh, realizing that you need specialized tools or insider knowledge of lost ancient keys to make progress. It's as if the pyramid is guarding its secrets behind locks made of time itself. You rise and brush off dust from your knees, your lamp illuminating the corridor's exit some 20 feet ahead. Before leaving, you pause to look back at the carved outlines and patched seams, each a testament to centuries of human hope and frustration. These false doors have tricked every generation of intruders: greedy tomb robbers, zealous archaeologists, curious tourists. Yet none have breached all of them. They stand silent, guardians of emptiness, mocking the promise of treasure and eternal knowledge. Stepping into the brighter chamber beyond, you feel relief flood your limbs as the open space welcomes your return. You leave behind the secret doors and their failed promises, carrying instead the memory of precise stonework, cunning deception, and the unbroken legacy of mystery. Historians still debate whether those false doors were masterpieces of deterrence or simple byproducts of quarrying excess blocks. But you know this: every carved panel and patched groove tells a story of human ingenuity meeting human greed, and of the enduring allure of hidden doorways in ancient stone. You pick your way through a low, winding corridor, the stone walls suddenly alive with ancient doodles and scrawled names. The graffiti of quarrymen who once labored here, leaving their breathless marks in the dark like medieval social media updates. Your headlamp illuminates a jumble of inscriptions, crude hieroglyphs, sketches of sandals, and even a rudimentary drawing of a cat chasing a mouse. It's as if these workers, thousands of years ago, paused mid-chisel to shout, "I was here," before returning to the back-breaking task of shaping granite. A mainstream fact: archaeologists have identified over 1,000 instances of ancient graffiti in the Great Pyramid, primarily in hidden passages and construction corridors, often recording work crew names like the Friends of Khufu or Good Men of the South. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were mere boredom busters or ritual markings to invoke divine protection while carving colossal stones. You crouch to examine a sketched pair of sandals, their straps looping in exaggerated curves. A quirky tidbit: fringe writers claim a sandal sketch found above the Queen's chamber entrance marks the secret stash of the master craftsman's lunch, a hidden cache of dried figs and barley cakes. You half expect to uncover crumbs beneath your boots, but find only a light dusting of grit and the faint echo of laughter across millennia. Your fingertips brush across a long name incised into the limestone: Khnumhotep, son of Menka, proclaiming his lineage in bold strokes. You can almost hear Khnumhotep's gruff voice, wiping sweat from his brow as he paused from dollarite pounding to make his mark. Historians still argue whether these names served as completion signatures like ancient "I built this" tags, or as spells ensuring the workers' spirits would be remembered and rewarded in the afterlife. Ahead, A cluster of red ochre scribbles vaguely spell out a lament. "Wishes I had a bed," painted in hasty, unsteady lines. You smile at the relatable sentiment. 4 millennia later, it feels eerily modern. Fringe enthusiasts whisper that some color graffiti contained hidden alchemical formulas, recipes for renewing one's youth and vitality, only readable by those initiated in the builder's secret brotherhood. You scrape at the ochre with a fingernail and taste chalky pigment, regretting your curiosity but marveling at the tactile link to Khnum-Hotep's breakroom grumbles. A stepped recess in the wall hosts a tiny throne sketch, complete with wobbly legs and a triangular backrest. You lean in close. Beneath it, someone has etched "King for a Day" in mirror image hieroglyphs. Scholars still argue whether such playful imagery was a form of sanctioned humor among labor gangs, or an act of defiance, silent mocking of the very pharaoh whose tomb they toiled to build. You imagine an ancient supervisor marching by, frowning at the rebellious caricature, only to shrug and move on. Your light catches a group portrait carved crudely into the stone surface. 5 stick figure workers, each labeled with a nickname: big ears, short legs, muddy boots. It reads like the world's oldest buddy comedy poster. A quirky rumor claims that a similar group sketch beneath the Grand Gallery was a highlight reel of the day's mishaps: misthrown chisels, spilled beer brews, and that one time someone's lunch sack got buried. You laugh softly, picturing a weary gang sharing tales under torchlight after a long shift. Between these lively scenes you find solemn votive graffiti, small crosses of red paint, carefully drawn beside doorways and passage thresholds. Mainstream Egyptologists suggest these were protective symbols, invoking gods like Hathor or Thoth to guard against misfortune in the maze-like interior. Historians still argue whether these symbols were officially sanctioned by temple priests or secretly added by superstitious workmen to ward off collapse and curses. You press your palm to one cross, feeling the faint residue of ochre and the weight of ancient prayer. Further on, a curious inscription reads, "Here lie my broken dreams," scrawled diagonally across a wall corner. You pause, struck by its unexpected melancholy. Fringe theorists leap on lines like these, proposing they're coded messages from a suppressed rebel group within the workforce. An ancient labor union striking for better rations. You grit your teeth, imagining Khnum-Hotep leading a lunchtime picket line. "No more barley mush till we get our beer." It's a tempting tale, but mainstream scholars caution that we risk projecting modern notions onto Bronze Age sentiment. A small alcove reveals the tiniest, most delicate graffiti of all. A sketch of a bird in flight, its wings outstretched as though soaring above the pyramid's peak. Someone has underlined it with the single word "freedom." You exhale, the simple image and word piercing the solemn granite around you. Historians still argue whether such poetic graffiti served as private meditations on life beyond the grind, or as coded signals between hidden chambers. You imagine the artist closing his eyes, picturing the open sky in a world of sand and stone. As you move past, you disturb a loose flake of limestone, causing a faint cascade of dust and a miniature echo that sets your heart racing. You shake your head, chuckling, "Still got it, buddy." You tell yourself about the pyramid's ability to startle even the most seasoned explorer. It reminds you of our earlier echoes in Section 1 and Section 2, ghostly replies that feel human, as if those long-dead scribes watched you trace their words and ribs in the stone. You enter a broader gallery where the graffiti gives way to smoother, untouched walls. Evidence modern conservationists have cleaned sections to preserve structural integrity. You spot one cleaned-over patch and shine your light on its seam. A small fragment of red ochre still peeks out, like a secret note refusing to be silenced. Scholars debate the ethics of graffiti removal. Is it preserving history or erasing the voices of the pyramid's true builders? You run your finger along the edge of the patch, torn between respect for the whole and reverence for individual expression. Pausing at the gallery's threshold, you take one last look at the vibrant tapestry of ancient tagging. You sense a community echoing across the centuries, Khnum-Hotep rubbing shoulders with you, sharing humor, frustration, and dreams as real as your own. The graffiti may not have been palace art, but it's the most human art in the pyramid, raw, unfiltered, and utterly alive. You step forward into the next corridor, leaving behind the scrawled jokes, the weary laments, and the tiny prayers etched in dust. Yet as you go, you carry those marks with you, the reminder that even in the grandest monuments the smallest voices endure. You emerge from the polished precision of the Great Pyramid's inner galleries and find yourself blinking in a shaft of pale sunlight as you step onto the plateau toward the bent pyramid at Darshur. The angle shift in its silhouette catches your eye immediately, its lower portion leaning at a steeper 54 degrees before abruptly easing to 43 degrees above, as though the builders mid-construction glanced up and thought, "Whoa, too steep for my taste." You trudge closer, sand crunching underfoot, toes tasting the grainy warmth, and swear you can almost feel the pyramid's half-finished sigh of relief. A mainstream fact: the bent pyramid was constructed around 200 and 600 BCE, under Pharaoh Sneferu, and represents one of Egypt's earliest attempts at a smooth-sided structure, though its change in inclination suggests builders encountered structural stresses and adjusted the angle to prevent collapse. Historians still argue whether the shift was a deliberate architectural refinement or an emergency tweak after dangerous cracks appeared in the rising core. You run your gaze up the lower section, noting the larger, coarser blocks laid in pronounced layers, each seam visible like the rings of a tree pausing mid-growth. Fringe theorists claim those seams are deliberate story markers, each band representing a pharaoh's decades of reign encoded in stone, though no hieroglyphic key has ever been found to interpret them. You picture an ancient chalkboard with the scribble Sneferu, Year 7 angle too steep, and chuckle at the notion of architects arguing over chalk lines under a desert sun. Circling the base, you brush your hand across the rough casing stones that survive only on the lower half, their edges weathered into soft bevels. Your fingers catch shards of red ochre from chipped outer plaster, remnants of a once gleaming white and red facade, a quirky tidbit. Early 19th century explorers reported finding fragments of bright blue pigment here, leading to fringe claims that the bent pyramid was originally polychromatic, perhaps striped, like a cosmic candy cane, though mainstream scholars dismiss this as pigment contamination from later tomb painting. You swipe dust from your palm and imagine the pyramid decked out in neon stripes, a pharaoh's idea of the world's largest runway for camels. Stepping backward, you note how the two faces meet at a sharp vertex about halfway up, creating a distinct notch against the sky. From a distance it looks like the pyramid sneezed mid-build and never quite finished wiping the mess. You picture a bored workman quipping, "We should have just built 2 pyramids," only to be handed another beer ration for morale. Historians still argue whether the angle change was a structural necessity after inspecting early stress fractures, or part of an unfulfilled ceremonial plan to crown the pyramid with a smaller capstone section of a different angle. You duck under a low lintel in the eastern entrance, ducking just enough to keep your helmet clear, and pass into a small vestibule where the air smells of limestone powder and something faintly like burned incense. The ceiling timbers here are neatly notched into the masonry, a pragmatic detail you don't remember seeing in the Great Pyramid. Fringe writers swoon over these recesses, speculating they once held glimmering copper chandeliers to illuminate midnight ritual gatherings. Though no charred wood or metal residues have ever been found, you tap the ceiling groove and joke, if only they invented LED bulbs back then. Beyond, you step into the main chamber, a squat, unassuming room whose corbelled roof narrows like the interior of a giant stone onion. The angle of the corbels shifts mid-height, mimicking the exterior's bent profile, a mainstream fact. This interior design appears nowhere else in Egyptian architecture, marking an experimental phase in roof support that was ultimately abandoned in later pyramids. Scholars still argue whether the bent corbelling was an aesthetic homage to the exterior, or a practical reinforcement to diffuse weight after witnessing dangerous load distributions. You press your palm to a corbel, feeling the cool solidity under your fingers as though the stone itself had learned from its mistakes. Your headlamp picks out tool marks on the limestone blocks, diagonal scoring etched by copper chisels, then refined with abrasive sand. You imagine the rhythms of chisels chattering like distant cicadas, the worker's body swaying in time with the repetitive strikes. A meditative trance, broken only by the overseer's whistle. Historians still argue whether those overseers used water-filled trenches as leveling aids here, or relied purely on primitive sightlines against the horizon. You step back and measure the angle in your mind, just slightly less steep than the lower course, and marvel at the precision achieved without laser levels. You move to the smaller subsidiary pyramid attached to the bent pyramid's southern side, its own angle, more uniform but far smaller scale. A quirky rumor says this mini-pyramid honored Sneferu's wife, suggesting a royal couple's matching set. but no inscriptions have confirmed such a dedication. You squint at the stubby little structure and joke volume discount on limestone, picturing a quaint family monument where Sneferu and his queen might have shared royal snacks in eternal peace. Stepping outside, you feel the desert sun on your back and hear the distant buzz of tourists snapping selfies against the bent pyramid's odd profile. It's a modern echo of centuries of visitors, all drawn by its off-kilter charm. A mainstream fact: the bent pyramid is one of only 2 Egyptian pyramids retaining much of its original casing stones, providing crucial insight into the builders' finishing techniques. Historians still argue whether its surviving casing represents original construction or later restoration by Egyptians, fascinated with their own heritage. You grin at the thought of modern restorers patching holes with cement, a handyman's solution to 4 millennia-old imperfections. You trail your hand along the transition point where the angle shifts, running your finger along an imperceptible step carved between blocks. The notch feels deliberate, perhaps a marker where engineers recalibrated their instruments. Fringe enthusiasts claim this line is a pyramid vibrational node, a spot where the stones hum at a specific frequency when struck, a sort of ancient tuning fork. You rap the stones sharply with your knuckle and hear a muted clink, but no humming chorus responds. You shrug. Either you lack the cosmic tuning fork, or the universe isn't taking requests tonight. Crossing to the western face, you notice subtle color differences between the upper and lower blocks, lower stones glinting with traces of microfossils, upper ones rendering pale cream, a quirky geological detail, not the work of aliens, but it makes you wonder if the builders intentionally selected contrasting limestone types to accentuate the bend. Historians still argue whether quarry logistics or aesthetic intent dictated stone choice, but you prefer the idea that Sneferu's architects were the world's first abstract artists. You pause to admire the plateau view. The bent pyramid stands like a half-told story against the horizon, its lean a bold admission that even the ancients made mistakes. You recall the echoing jokes from Section 7 about corbelled ceilings and Section 3's hum of cosmic resonance, and you wonder if Sneferu ever intended the bent pyramid to resonate with the rising sun at dawn, celebrating the god Ra's daily rebirth, half steep for the morning light, half gentle for the afternoon shadows. You peer at the stone westward, picturing golden rays glancing off the leaning face at sunrise, a temple in light and shadow. As you step away, the wind whips sand around your ankles, a medal of victory for anyone daring enough to behold this architectural oddity in person. You taste the air dry, mineral-laced, carrying the faintest promise of discovery, and tip your head to the pyramid's asymmetric silhouette. Maybe this was more than a mistake. Perhaps it was the ultimate experiment in form and function, a deliberate dialectic between aspiration and limitation. You take a final look at the bent pyramid's unique profile, feeling a kinship with those early engineers who dared to bend the rules of geometry. Their adjustment, born of necessity or creativity, gave us a structure that still confounds modern minds and tickles your sense of wonder. Your boots scrape the plateau as you turn back toward the desert's horizon, ready to chase the next mystery in Section 14's dimly lit Black Pyramid, where legends of curses await. You trudge away from the bent pyramid's jaunty tilt and make your way southward across the rippled sands until you arrive at the Black Pyramid of Amenemhat III. Its dark, decaying casing stones, giving it a brooding silhouette against the midday glare. As you step onto its eroded base, the contrast from gleaming white limestone to the coarse, almost pitch-black core blocks feels like crossing from daylight into a half-forgotten dream. You pause to catch your breath, tasting grit and a whisper of dread on the wind, as though this pyramid carries a weight heavier than mere stone. A mainstream fact: the Black Pyramid at Dusha dates to around 1850 BCE, built for Pharaoh Amenemhat III of the 12th dynasty, originally standing about 330 feet high before its outer casing collapsed under structural strain. Historians still argue whether its premature decay stemmed from faulty engineering, waterlogged core stones swelling from rising groundwater, or from poor maintenance in later centuries. You step closer to the entry corridor, ducking beneath crumbled masonry beams that once formed a sturdy passage. Inside, the air is stale and faintly sour, like a tomb that's held its breath too long. Fringe storytellers claim a phantom caretaker guards Amenemhat's remains, a spectral priest forever pacing the galleries, whispering curses at intruders. You shine your lamp around, half expecting a translucent figure in linen robes to float by, muttering, You shouldn't be here, buddy. Instead, you catch only the flutter of moth wings and your own ragged breathing. Crouching through the low, sloping descent, you notice tool marks that echo those in the Great Pyramid. But here they're poorly aligned, as if workers rushed to beat the Nile floods back to their basements. You shuffle over uneven flagstones and feel the pyramid creak ever so slightly under your weight. Historians still argue whether the builders skimped on quality control under Amenemhet's tight schedule, or if successive repairs introduced misaligned blocks leading to the eventual collapse. You joke, that's what happens when you rush an IKEA build, and your echo snorts in reply. Reaching the first chamber, you shine your light across walls streaked with greenish mineral veins, evidence of groundwater seepage that battered the core's lower courses. A quirky tidbit: local Bedouin legends say the weeping stones here cry tears that can heal maladies if collected at midnight, though you wouldn't want to catch pneumonia fetching them. You cup your hand to a damp patch, tasting the cold moisture and regretting it immediately as your tongue puckers. Note to self, don't sample pyramid tap water, you mutter. Pressing onward, you enter a roughly rectangular gallery, where collapsed fill blocks choke corridors, and half-buried wooden beams loom like giant matchsticks. Fringe conspiracy blogs claim those beams were part of a hidden funerary barge, an underground boat burial intended for Amenemhet's spirit, but modern excavators have only found mundane debris. You grin at the idea of hauling a royal canoe through a sand-filled chamber, and nearly laugh until you stub your toe on a fallen stone. Boat launch here, you groan, hopping on one foot until the pain subsides. Ahead lies the pyramid's central chamber, or rather what remains of it. A half-collapsed room where jagged blocks jut at odd angles, like broken teeth in a skull. You gingerly balance across rubble, mindful of shifting stone, a mainstream fact. This central vault once contained an alabaster sarcophagus, later looted and lost, leaving only faint traces on the floor where it sat. Historians still argue whether the sarcophagus was ever sealed within this chamber, or left in a subsidiary vault to confuse tomb robbers. You peer into the dust-cleared outline in the floor and imagine a ghostly coffer perched there, only to recall that ghosts don't really need furniture. Scraping past a leaning wall, you squeeze through a narrow fissure into a secondary niche, where your headlamp illuminates a crudely cut relief of the Uraeus cobra, its hood flared in eternal vigilance. Fringe enthusiasts claim this carving animated at dusk, hissing warnings to greedy souls. You watch the cobra flicker in the light, and note it doesn't wiggle. You quip, best security system ever, just add haunted snake, and shiver despite the heat. You climb over a pile of rubble into an antechamber, where a low bench-like ledge wraps around one wall. You sit and run your fingers along its worn edge, noting deep grooves carved by centuries of feet brushing limestone. A quirky tidbit: a local tale insists that stumbling upon this bench guarantees a visitor will dream of the pharaoh's secrets that night, though you're pretty sure your bladder will rob you of that sleep. You pat your pockets for tissues instead of scrolls. Your lamp flickers as you push into the final corridor, lined with dark patches of soot, remnants of centuries of torches, lit by explorers seeking the fabled curse inscription. Fringe lore credits the Black Pyramid with housing a tablet that curses any who disturb the king's rest. Mainstream Egyptologists dismiss this as Victorian sensationalism, noting no such tablet has been found. Historians still argue whether a genuine curse text ever existed or if 19th century adventured it to sell lurid tales in penny dreadfuls. You whisper, "Curse?" More like clickbait, and tiptoe past the charred stone. Finally, you emerge into a small chamber where the ceiling collapsed long ago, leaving a shaft of daylight to filter in like a juddering spotlight. Dust motes swirl in the beam, and for a moment you feel like an actor on an antique stage. You stand in silence, feeling the pyramid's pulse in the shifting light. A mainstream fact: the Black Pyramid's core collapsed between the New Kingdom and Late Period, prompting ancient repair teams to quarry fresh blocks and reassemble sections, efforts that, ironically, led to further destabilization. Historians still argue whether these repairs were made to preserve royal legacy, or to recycle stones for new construction projects elsewhere. You lean against a surviving granite threshold, noting carved grooves where a portcullis once slid, now rusted away into memory. Fringe writers claim a fragment of the original portcullis survives, embedded in the ground beyond, waiting to be reactivated by a secret key. But you see only sand and a corroded metal rod. You pat your pocket for a keyring you don't have, and sigh, "Great, Now I need a pharaoh's skeleton key. Stepping into the sunlight above, you blink as the brightness overwhelms your night-adapted eyes. The searing heat and open sky feel surreal after that claustrophobic crawl, and you gulp in fresh air like a castaway resurfacing from the deep. You glance back at the Black Pyramid's battered facade, its half-destroyed casing stones still clinging like blackened teeth. You can almost hear its silent lament, built to stand forever, yet reduced to a haunted ruin. You shake sand from your boots and flex sore muscles, tasting sweat and relief. A final fringe rumor floats through your mind that Amenemhat's spirit lingers under that rubble, ready to guide lost explorers to untold treasure. Historians still argue whether belief in such spirits hindered official excavations or merely added color to reports. You chuckle, imagining the pharaoh holding a lantern and rolling his eyes. Really, Gus? This again? You turn away from the Black Pyramid. Its curse is unproven, but its lessons clear. Even the mightiest designs can falter, and not every secret is worth the toll it takes to reveal. Your footsteps carry you across the sands towards Section 15's modern ultrasound revelations, leaving behind the half-lit halls of Amenemhat's shadowed tomb, where curses and curiosity dance like dust motes in a single beam of light. You step back into the belly of the Great Pyramid, leaving behind the Black Pyramid's half-lit corridors and retracing your path toward the area above the Grand Gallery, where the latest chapter of pyramid intrigue unfolds. As you pass the bonding blocks from Section 7 and recall the false doors of Section 11, your headlamp's beam catches something new. Modern instrumentation bolted to the stone, slender detectors peeking into narrow gaps. It feels like archaeological high-tech meets ancient monument. A handshake across 4 millennia. A mainstream fact. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used cosmic muon radiography, detecting high-energy particles from space, to reveal a previously unknown big void above the Grand Gallery, a cavity over 100 feet long and up to 23, making it the largest internal feature discovered since the 19th century. Historians still argue whether this void is a structural gap designed to relieve weight on lower chambers, or an undiscovered corridor leading to hidden rooms. You crouch beside one of the muon detectors, its yellow casing scuffed by sandstorms and time, and imagine the countless particles streaming through stone like ghostly messengers. Fringe theorists claim those muons are scanning not just for empty space but for alien technology. Perhaps a dormant teleportation pad tucked away in the pyramid's core. You grin at the idea of interstellar engineers leaving behind a hidden stargate under Khufu's feet, only to realize your phone doesn't have the app to hack it. As you press forward, you recall the echoing hush of the King's Chamber in Section 3, and the whispered graffiti of bored workmen in Section 12. Now, you're amidst sensors that hum softly, their cables disappearing into drilled holes filled with epoxy. Reminders that even the subtlest modern intrusion can leave a mark on stone meant to last forever. You run a gloved finger along a ceiling plug and feel the resin's tackiness, contrasting sharply with the granite's icy smoothness. The corridor slopes upward into the Grand Gallery, that majestic ramp flanked by corbelled walls you admired back in Section 7. Here, a trio of muon detectors is perched on mini tripods, angled precisely to capture particle trajectories through adjacent blocks. You crouch behind one, imagining yourself as both explorer and eavesdropper, listening in on the pyramid's silent secrets. Mainstream engineers confirm that muon imaging can penetrate up to hundreds of feet of stone, offering a non-invasive method to map interior spaces without chiseling a single block. Scholars still argue whether further voids, perhaps smaller ancillary chambers, await discovery beyond this big void. You inch into the Grand Gallery proper, the detectors monitoring your every move as if you're an unwilling subject in a cosmic radiography experiment. It feels strangely intimate. You, an intrepid intruder, them, patient scientists waiting for data to trickle in over weeks. Fringe blogs speculate that the void above the gallery connects to the Queen's chamber shafts. Remember Section 5 and Section 8, forming an underground network engineered to channel the pharaoh's breath directly to the stars. You replay your own jokes about cosmic Skype calls and soul elevators, wondering if muons could finally settle the argument. Higher up, you spot a ladder leading to an inspection hatch carved into the vaulting stones. A modern plaque marks it Access Point 3, its lettering incongruous against ancient hieroglyphic absence. You open the hatch with a click, revealing a narrow vertical conduit, an exploratory shaft created only for scientists, not tomb robbers. You poke your head in, darkness stares back, padded cables snaking downward like metal vines. Historians still argue whether such investigative shafts compromise the pyramid's structural integrity or serve as vital windows into its hidden world. Peering through, you remember the juice of water dripping in the subterranean void. Section 6, and the hush of the Queen's Chamber airshafts. Sections 4 and 8. Here, there is no ancient breeze, only the slight hiss of electronic air filters keeping dust at bay. It feels like a hospital operating on a 4,000-year-old patient, each sensor a probe into the body of stone. You climb back down and step into the antechamber joining the Grand Gallery's base. An alcove once considered purely functional, now repurposed as a makeshift laboratory. Plastic crates hold laptops, spare batteries, and notebooks filled with data tables. You lift a sheet from the pile, sketches of muon tracks overlaid on an architectural plan, dotted lines indicating possible vaults. A quirky tidbit. Some fringe enthusiasts believe that muon images captured by camera phones in the gallery glow faintly in the dark, like spectral photographs of hidden rooms. You half expect a Polaroid to emerge, but all you find are mundane spreadsheets. One scientist explains to you in hushed tones, as if invoking an oracle, that muon radiography revealed 3 smaller voids behind the north face, none large enough to enter, but tantalizing hints of empty space. You nod and mutter, "Great. More tiny closets to explore," recalling the countless niches you squeezed through in earlier sections. Historians still argue whether these micro-voids represent unfinished construction pockets or deliberate secret compartments for ritual items. Your lamp flickers as you step through the Grand Gallery's highest end, where the horizontal relieving slabs from Section 3 rise overhead. A triangular patch of clay plaster conceals one detector's entry point, camouflaging modern intrusion against ancient materials. You tap the plaster, half expecting it to crumble like the patched gypsum cracks in the Queen's Chamber. Section 5. But it holds firm. It's a fitting callback, repair and concealment, ancient and modern, intertwining in stone. Walking back down, you notice the polished limestone floor where you left footprints in Section 7. Now, your steps mix with small rubber boot impressions left by researchers, a temporary layer of new history atop the old. You pause, bending to inspect the prints side by side, human curiosity chronologically stacked like courses of masonry. You laugh softly, so even muon scientists leave their mark, and imagine future graffiti emblazoned with Team Muon in dusty script. As you exit the gallery and re-enter the adjacent corridor, the detectors fall silent behind you. The walls seem to exhale, reclaiming the hush of millennia. You taste dust and electronic residue on your tongue, a bizarre fusion of ancient grit and modern gadgetry. It's uncanny to feel the pyramid responding to cosmic rays and high-tech scrutiny. Its internal architecture revealed by particles that have traversed galaxies. You emerge at the base of the Grand Gallery, standing beneath the corbels, where we once speculated about acoustic resonances. Section 3. Now, you imagine the big void above reverberating not with chants but with streams of muons, silent cartographers painting hidden chambers onto physics detectors. You lean against a polished joint, recalling the tiny cracks and graffiti from Sections 1 and 12, and realize that the pyramid story is still unfolding, stone pages awaiting interpretation. Before you depart, you pause to consider the scholarly debates. Will future scans reveal an undiscovered burial chamber? Or are these voids merely weight relief cavities, empty by design and devoid of treasure? Historians still argue whether muon radiography is the final answer, or a prelude to even more sophisticated methods, neutrino tomography perhaps, or quantum gravimetric imaging. You smile at the thought of scientists poking quantum probes through 4,000-year-old stone. With a final glance at the scan pyramid's detectors lining the corridor, you step back into the dim passages, the echo of your boots replaced by the whisper of cosmic particles. The pyramid holds its secrets, but now we have new keys, high-energy muons from the heavens, mapping voids that once eluded plumb bobs and spirit levels. You flick off your headlamp and trust your eyes to dark adaptation, carrying the memory of shadows and senses into the next and final exploration, resting in the unknown. You pause at the threshold of the Great Pyramid's inner labyrinth, every muscle humming with echoes of your 1,000-step descent and ascent. Dust motes drift like slow dancers in your headlamp's glow, reminding you of the motes that once swirled in the big void and Grand Gallery where muon detectors now whisper of hidden spaces. You take a deep breath, tasting limestone grit and the faint metallic tang of ancient tools, and feel the weight of centuries settle around you like a heavy cloak you can't shrug off. A mainstream fact: the Great Pyramid's core masonry comprises over 2 million blocks, each weighing between 2 and 70 tons, positioned with such precision that the overall structure remains stable after more than 4,500 years. Historians still argue whether that perfection was achieved through water-filled leveling trenches, or by sightline surveys guided by stars and simple plumb bobs. You trace an imaginary line along a joint, recalling the micro-scratches you felt in Section 7, and marvel at how human hands, no aliens required, shaped this stony testament to ambition. You step forward into the final gallery, its polished floor worn smooth by the footsteps of explorers like Davison and Vise, whose gunpowder blasts still cling to the walls in soot and shattered stone. Fringe writers claim those blasts triggered self-sealing mechanisms, forever hiding the pharaoh's true treasure. But you remember that every secret door you poked at only revealed more empty voids. You smirk, thinking of Section 11's false doors playing hide-and-seek with looters and archaeologists alike. The air here carries a gentle hum, not of cosmic energy, sadly, but the distant sigh of the desert wind pressing through hidden shafts. You close your eyes momentarily, recalling the eerie echoes you tested with Greensleeves in Section 4. It doesn't resonate, but in the darkness you almost hear chanting priests drumming beneath the corbelled ceilings of the king's chamber. Historians still argue whether the engineers calibrated acoustic channels for ritual use, or left those diagonal ceiling grooves purely as weight relief experiments. Ahead lies a narrow slit of light, where the ascending passage meets the original entrance. You step into that shaft, feeling shoulders brush against perfectly dressed limestone, and you imagine every pilgrim who's ever wriggled through these conduits, some seeking fresh air, others chasing the pharaoh's breath skyward. A quirky tidbit: explorers once fashioned makeshift harnesses from climbing rope to rappel through these shafts, dubbing themselves pyramid spelunkers, though you're pretty sure none trained their ropes on Insta-worthy selfies. Emerging into the cool evening air outside, you're struck by the silhouette of the Great Pyramid against a violet sky. The massive blocks now look serene, their seams almost invisible in fading light. You let your pack fall to the sand and kneel, running fingers through grains that have shifted beneath those same stones since Khufu's reign. Here the dust feels like memory itself, raw, unfiltered, and profoundly human. A final mainstream fact: the Great Pyramid's original height was approximately 81 feet, making it the world's tallest structure for nearly 4 millennia, until Lincoln Cathedral claimed the crown. Historians still argue whether the pyramid's capstone was gilded or left plain, a question complicated by the absence of any surviving casing fragments on the summit. You glance upward, picturing that missing pyramidion glowing in desert sun, a beacon lost to time. The desert hush is broken only by distant calls from tour camels and the occasional laughter of late-strolling visitors. You rise slowly, muscles creaking like ancient hinges, and stretch your arms wide as though to embrace the entire plateau. A fringe theory floats to mind: that the pyramid's true marvel is not its stonework, but its alignment to Orion's belt, a cosmic equation writ large in limestone. You chuckle, no satellite imagery required, just a sleepless host and a fan for ambience. As night falls, the first stars wink into existence above the pyramid's flat face. You remember the shafts aimed at Thuban and Sirius, the glyphs of Nut painted across walls, and the fractured dreams etched in graffiti by bored workmen. All these fragments, structural, ritual, mundane, compose one vast, unfinished poem. Historians still argue whether Khufu intended his tomb as a majestic beacon for eternity, or simply as a secure vault for his ka. Either way, the poem remains open-ended, inviting every curious soul to add their own stanza. You collect your gear, dusting sand from compass, camera, and headlamp, each tool now hallowed by the pyramid's dust. Then, you step back to survey the monument one last time, noting its silent geometry against the deepening sky. You whisper, "Thank you for the tour," half joking that the pyramid might answer with shifting stones and murmured echoes. But it remains silent, inscrutable, and infinitely patient, its secrets safe, for now, in the shadows of its chambers. You brush sand from your knees and turn toward the horizon, where the desert stretches like a blank page. Behind you lies a maze of shafts, chambers, graffiti, and muon scans, a journey through both human history and human imagination. Ahead lies only darkness and stars, and in that space between you carry the pyramid's mysteries within you, content to let some riddles remain sealed in stone. Wind down, the desert night wraps around you like a soft blanket, its cool air laced with ancient calm. Each breath you draw mingles with the lingering scent of limestone, and the faint memory of incense, gentle reminders of rituals long concluded. Your footsteps slow naturally as though guided by the sands themselves, and the world seems to exhale alongside you. Starlight drips across the pyramid's outline, lengthening shadows until the massive stones blur into gentle silhouettes. In this hush, the relentless drive to know yields to a soothing acceptance. Some chambers may remain forever hidden, some glyphs forever undeciphered, and in that unknowability lies a quiet solace. You realize that closure is not always the point. Sometimes wonder itself becomes the companion that guides you towards sleep. The wind's soft sigh echoes the distant drumbeats you once imagined in the king's chamber, transforming mystery into lullaby. Memories of cheeky graffiti, hammer-worn niches, and cosmic airshafts drift through your thoughts like drifting sand, each image softening as it passes. You feel your shoulders unburden, tension dissolving into the night air, replaced by contentment born of discovery and acceptance. As you settle onto a dune's gentle curve, your gaze rises to the glittering sky, where Orion and Thuban keep watch. The pyramid below stands in silent reverence, its angles softened by moonlight into a whisper of stone. You press your palm into warm sand and close your eyes, letting eyelids grow heavy. Tonight, you rest beside a marvel older than any memory of sleep. You carry its silent lessons in your heart: patience, humility, and the enduring joy of questions without answers. In that timeless stillness, you drift toward dreams, embraced by ancient stones and desert winds, cradled by the pyramid's gentle mysteries until morning's soft embrace. End of script. Sweet dreams.